All right, on this one, I'm gonna do it slightly different. I'm gonna let the full question and the full answer, and then I'll give my translation.
Is your assessment, Dr. Fauci, that the Sunbelt states that are now hotspots, that they reopened too quickly, and do you think that they did because of political pressure?
You know, I can't answer the second part of the question. I think it's a variation because some of the governors and mayors in those places actually declared the right pace, but the citizenry, if you look at what's happened in some of them, when you see people gathering, congregating, many without masks in crowded places. So there's two versions of that. Either the leaders of the states and the cities declared that you do it in a prudent, careful way, but the citizenry felt, I'm just going to let it fly and do what I want to do. And in other cases, I'm not going to name anyone specifically, that states, I think, did not go by those checkpoints where you had the gateway, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, that we spoke about many times at the White House press conferences. I think that there was a bit of both of those things, which led to the surges that have occurred. Thank goodness now that people are pulling back and tightening up, and they're starting to turn around in several of those states. What we got to make sure we get careful is that other states don't repeat what happened there, because we really want to avoid any more of those surges related to not approaching the reopening process in as prudent a way as one should.
First of all, before I go on with this, commenting on this answer that Fauci just gave here, I'm on my second strike on the channel. So if you see, the channel is just gone, you don't see anything being reposted, you know what happened. So I'll appreciate if you follow the links in some of my videos and sub to BitChute and Library. But anyways, going back to this thing, Fauci here, first of all, he says, I'm not going to answer the second part of the question, but he does. And he's talking about, people congregating, but he doesn't say anything about people protesting. Protesting is fine, just like you saw in the last video I did on Fauci when he was being drilled on this question. And so he's actually brought up the point specifically congregating. Who congregates? People at churches, right? So, well, yeah, people have been congregating and that's wrong. No mention of people just protesting, right? So those are good. Those are fine because it goes with their agenda. And the other thing is, like, these days I had spikes. What spikes? What are these people freaking crazy? I mean, what are they talking about? More testing and more cases? That's fine. That's normal. That's to be expected. They keep saying more cases and putting the fear on people like there is more people sick. All they have is more people who are testing positive, even if you can trust the freaking results on these tests anyways. So this is all I have to do here. I mean, read between the lines, all these words, all these jargon, all this crap that they put in these answers. You have to really scrutinize it and be careful to, how you take it.
The president has obviously been eager to have states reopen. He said in a recent interview that the virus was under control, or at least as well under control as it can be. Is that an assessment that you would agree with?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you talk about, and I think what the president was referring to, he does, and as the president wants to look at the brighter side of things. If you look at the curves of the states that were hot in the sense of surging, remember, we had a baseline, Jeff, of 20,000 cases a day. And that was a problem because if you want control, you've got to get the base down way lower than that. So when you start off with a baseline of 20, 20, 20 over multiple weeks, then when you open up, whether you do it prematurely or you do it correctly, but some people don't abide by it, what you see is what we saw. Went to 40, 50, 60, 70, which was just not acceptable if you're trying to get something under control. It's starting to come back down now. So you're starting to see the curve go in the right direction. That's fine. But the thing that we've got to make sure of that the reason why we want to absolutely get the public to appreciate that that doesn't have to happen when you try to open and get the economy back. You don't need to either shut down completely or let it rip, as I say. And I use that terminology when we were talking about that. You might remember, Jeff, there is a middle ground where you can prudently open. So I think the misperception among some is that either you're going to shut us down completely or we're going to do whatever we want. No, that was the reason for the guidelines of opening up the country. If you do it prudently, you don't have to shut down. And so what we're looking at now, and Dr. Birx has pointed this out correctly, that there are some states in that yellow zone, as it were, where they're just starting to have the inkling of a percent positive going up. So what we've got to do is make sure we don't let those little blips turn into surges. And, I'll repeat here quickly, the 5 or 6 things that you do: wearing a mask consistently and properly, physical distance, avoiding crowds, stay away from bars and places where people congregate. Outdoors is always safer and better than indoors, and hand hygiene. That seems, Jeff, so simplistic, but it's true, because the states that have done that, Arizona went way up and they came right down by doing those simple things. And if everybody used that as kind of the guideline basic staples of what you do, we can avoid those surges and we could gradually progress towards opening the country.
Wow, so much to unpack here. First of all, I can't help to think that these questions are just scripted, to divide us politically and sociologically. Fauci saying here how, Trump is always trying to look at the good side of things. Not that I like Trump or I think any politician is good or evil. They're all evil. The fact that they're in politics, tells you everything you need to know. But Fauci saying how Trump is always looking at the bright side of things. It's like, that's the right thing to do. All these other doctors and Fauci and Gates and everybody else and Birx, is always looking at the doom and gloom and everybody's going to die. Such a fear-monger group. It's insane. Then he's talking about the spikes. And again, spikes where? And the states that, lock us down, did better. That's such a bullshit. People, he's saying basically the people that are not abiding by the rules are the people getting sick. That's exactly the opposite that I've seen. I've never worn a mask. My family has never worn a mask. We don't social distance and do any, or let's call it the right way. We don't do anti-social distance. And I have a huge family. I haven't met anybody who's sick. I haven't met anybody who has died from it. Nevertheless, forget about being sick, but dying. I haven't known of anybody who's died from this thing. So I'm not saying that people have died out there of cold and flu and other complications. Yeah, people die every year, and you can go back to 2018 and see how more people have died in 18 than died this year. And the only one person, actually, I wouldn't be sincere if I didn't say I do have a relative overseas who's actually sick with, flu, cold, whatever you call it, COVID, if you have to. But and the only reason he is, and I told him, well, not them specifically, I said, don't get tested. You'll get sick. He was feeling a little cough, a little, got worried, got tested. 2 days later, got worse. The first test actually came out negative. Doesn't make sense. So he was a little sore throat, a little, got worried, went to get tested. 2 days later, he got worse, went to get tested again, and then he was positive. So did he get something in that first test? Probably. And lastly, he's again talking about people. We need to shut down people where people congregate. He says it again, congregations. He's just hinting at it, but he's not really telling you that they need to close all the churches and all the places of worship. But no mention of protests. That's Basically it. And people have been offering to, wear a mask and physically distance at churches and stuff, and that's not good enough. But people can go and protest without mask and just right on top of each other, and that's okay with them. Fine and dandy, right?
Is there any way that someone can describe this situation now as under control?
Well, the answer is obviously when you have 50,000 cases as a public health official, if you look at it in the big picture of things, even though there are some sections of the country that have done well, come down and are at a good baseline and are staying there. I think the confusing thing about the terminologies, Jeff, is that we're a big country. You can pick out some parts of the country that are looking good and you could say is under control. You could pick some parts of the country that are on fire in the sense, I mean, you're having outbreaks that, you don't get 70,000 cases a day when nothing's going on. So there is some good news there, and we want to emulate those areas that have been able to successfully contain it by doing the things that one needs to do to keep it down. And we know what they are. I just mentioned them.
Yeah, but it's not under control.
Jeff, the issue is you can hear what I'm saying. What I don't want is a soundbite that says one person says this, the other person says that. And the reason why is because then that distracts from the message that I'm trying to give. I mean, I've just been through this so many times. I don't want to get distracted by that. I just want to give the public health facts of what we need to do. We can reopen the country, reopen the economy without the extremes. We don't need to shut down, and we definitely shouldn't let it rip, as it were.
This guy thinks he's such a slick stick, with his propaganda, just, putting fear on people about 50,000 cases and 50,000 more, people with COVID. But he's actually he says 50,000 cases, kind of like leaving it very ambiguous. It's just 50 more people that freaking happened to go to get tested and they got a positive result. Doesn't really mean they have anything. It just means they were tagged as positive COVID. And the whole lockdown thing is just stupid. I mean, healthy people, you just let them get sick and you get to herd immunity, and that's it. People who are vulnerable, old people who have diabetes or heart issues, those people you do quarantine. They need to self-quarantine if they're smart, right? But not the healthy people. What are we going to do? Lock everybody down, and then when you let them out again, they get sick, and we're going to lock down again. You just freaking got to let them get sick. And he at the end says there, I don't want a soundbite to distract from the message. What? The message that, we want to make slave out of everybody? That's the message.
Dr. Fauci, you've expressed optimism about having a vaccine by the end of this year or early next year. What does that mean in practical terms? Do you expect a vaccine to be authorized by the FDA by then? And when would you expect it to be widely used across the country?
No, that's a good question. I do. When I talk about a vaccine that is available, I'm talking about something that has been proven in a randomized placebo-controlled trial to be both safe and effective. And right now, as you probably know, 2 of these in the United States went into phase 3 trial on July 27th. We're accruing patients in that right now. It's a prime boost. You give a first shot on day 0, 28 days later, a boost, and then it takes about 3 months to get people enrolled. If there are enough infections in the country, which there likely will be, apropos of what Jeff and I were just talking about, we're going to have infections in this country, you might likely get an indication that if it works and if it's safe by the end of this calendar year. I might add that I'm cautiously optimistic, though you can never guarantee things with a vaccine. I'm cautiously optimistic that we will have a vaccine that's effective enough to get approved, because the early studies in the phase 1 study showed that it induced the kind of neutralizing antibodies that were at least comparable, if not better, than what you see in convalescent serum. And that's a hallmark of a predictive quality that a vaccine might work. If that occurs, by the end of the year, we'll be able to have a vaccine. Now, the second part of your question is, when are you going to be able to get it in the arms? So the at-risk process is, even as we don't know yet whether it works or not, the federal government has invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to make vaccine at risk. At risk doesn't mean at risk for safety, and it doesn't mean at risk for scientific integrity. It means at financial risk, because if the vaccine works, you've saved multiple months. If the vaccine doesn't work, you've lost a lot of money. But the government feels that even if you lose that, it's worth doing it to get a head start on the production. So we likely are going to have maybe tens of millions of doses in the early part of the year. But as we get into 2021, the manufacturers tell us that they will have hundreds of millions and likely 1 billion doses by the end of 2021. So I think the process is moving along at a pretty favorable pace.
Why is it a running theme with these guys, Bill Gates and Fauci? Every time they're talking about, having many cases of COVID, they just get this, or of any disease, they just get this smile and this grim. Just go back to the video and watch Fauci when he's mentioning that bit about we're going to have, towards the end of the year, by 2021, many, many more cases, basically saying that they'll know when to start vaccinating people if the numbers come down. How do they know the numbers are not going to come down naturally? That, this thing is just going to wear itself out, just like every other disease does. So if this thing, even if they inject people with water and it doesn't kill anybody, they're going to say, oh, the vaccine worked. Now nobody else is getting sick. And I am hoping it kills a lot of people. I really do. I mean, call me mean, but if you're stupid enough to take this thing, I hope it kills a lot of people. So they will go to jail, because this is the only way to put these guys in jail. And lastly, he's talking about that the government prepay for these vaccines at risk. At risk of what? At risk of putting us all into debt? It's not the government paying for it. It's we, the people, paying for it. So they're spending a lot of our money, getting us in debt and ruining the economy.
And there's concern among the general public that a vaccine's going to get introduced before the risks are fully known. Right. How will you know about potential long-term side effects, and how can you reassure the public that the vaccines are going to be safe?
Well, the decision is made by the regulatory agency, the FDA. As a scientist and someone who has been developing vaccines now for a considerable period of time, I would want to feel comfortable when I've had enough people in the trial that I get a good efficacy signal and a good safety signal. And that means you've done thousands of people and you don't see any unanticipated, unexpected, severe adverse events. You're going to get people that have minor things like pain in the arm and a little swelling. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about severe adverse events. When we feel confident of that, that's when I will feel confident that a vaccine is made widely available. Because one thing people sometimes forget, you give a vaccine to someone who's perfectly well that you're trying to prevent infection, which means you're going to be giving it to hundreds of millions of people. So you better be darn sure, A, that it's safe, and B, that it works. And that's the criteria that I use.
Did this nitwit listen to the question? He's asking, how do we know there's not going to be any long-term effects from this vaccine? And he's talking about efficacy, and if they try it on thousands of people, they'll know by the results. Long-term effects means in 2 or 3 years, is this thing making everybody freaking sterile, which they have been doing for a long time, especially in Africa. And just think about it. I mean, how many people are these days having an issue having babies? I'm one of them. We had to use in vitro fertilization because my little guys were lazy. They worked, but they were like walking with crutches type of thing. and it's now so common. You see everybody. It's like a huge percentage of people have to get help, medical help, to conceive because something is making people infertile, right? I'm not gonna point to vaccines, but it's the food, medicines, who knows, bunch of different things, right? The environment too. But he's been asked about long-term effects, and he's just basically dodging the question. And he's saying, "Oh, and we have to make sure that it's good because we're gonna be giving it to healthy people." Yeah, exactly my point. We're giving this thing to healthy people. Why? Let them get the freaking disease. It's not like something that's gonna cripple them or something. If you're healthy, you're just gonna pull through it, just like the flu. It's actually less lethal than the flu. The statistics talk for themselves. And now you're going to give this thing to healthy people. You have no idea what it's going to do to them in the short term, mid, or long term.
How long are we as a country and we as a world going to be dealing with this virus?
Well, it's going to depend very heavily on the degree of efficacy and availability of a vaccine. Historically, if you get a vaccine that has a moderate to high degree of efficacy, and you combined with that prudent public health measures, we could put this behind us. I don't think we're going to eradicate this from the planet, Jeff, because it's such a highly transmissible virus that seems unlikely. But what I think we can do with a combination of a good vaccine and attention to public health measures, and by attention, I don't mean shut down. I mean things that are just prudent, that I think we can get this behind us. We may need to go through a season of it, and then by next season, if we have a vaccine, it won't be a pandemic. It won't be immobilizing the world. It won't be destroying the economy. But if we can get it to the point where we bring the levels so far down, then they would be very unlikely we would have to be concerned about it.
Here we go again, harping on Bill Gates' final solution, the vaccine. How does he know this thing isn't just going to work itself out like every other disease usually does? I mean, why do they think this thing is special? Do they have some inside knowledge we don't? The final solution, like Bill put it, so we can only go back to normal until everybody's vaccinated. And even then, he's saying that even if we have a vaccine next year and everybody gets vaccinated, there still be control. There still be precautions. So we all get vaccinated and we all have to follow the mask rules, the ID, the vaccination ID. You can't go here, you cannot go here if you weren't vaccinated, and so on. So these people are so freaking evil, man.
Do you think science is leading the charge, or do you think politics is leading the charge?
Well, with what we have to do, science is certainly at the table. And when you have a lot of other considerations that authorities talk to and listen to, that gets all put in the mix. The one thing I'll guarantee is that the public health and the scientific data and information that I and my colleagues give, and I can speak for them, is based on fact and based on evidence. And the thing about science that is an interesting component of all of this is that we're dealing with a moving target. This is uncharted territory. Remember, Mike and Jeff, 6-7 months ago, we were celebrating New Year's and not worrying about this. And now all of a sudden something comes along that we've never had experience with. So what you look at and see in January, from a scientific standpoint, you've got to act with policy and recommendations based on the data that you have at the time. If it were a static situation that didn't change, then what was true here would be true here. But when you have a moving target and you gain more information as the weeks and months go by, you've got to be transparent enough and humble enough and honest enough to say, this is different than what we realized 2-3 months ago. So we need to make some course changing. That's not bad science, guys. That's good science. Namely, act on the data that you have at the time and be flexible enough to change things based on new data as it accumulates.
I really don't blame Fauci for butchering this one. What a stupid question. But anyways, but he responded with a bunch of nonsense about the scientific method and you have to follow the data and blah, blah, blah. The data is all freaking made up and we all know it. Like Han Solo put it one, it's just a bunch of freaking tricks and nonsense, right? That's what they're doing. I haven't seen. You saw in China at the beginning of this thing, people killing over, people driving cars, passing out, having accidents in video. That hasn't happened. That didn't happen anywhere, right? So they probably either have some people scripted movements. I can't say what we call those type of people because I don't want to get this video flagged, but either that or some old videos from some unrelated things that happened. Somebody that died from a heart attack and just killed over. Somebody else who had a seizure or something while driving. But that didn't happen anywhere. It didn't happen in Spain, in Italy, didn't happen in England, hasn't happened in the United States. And what other country has more cameras on the street than England? And we haven't seen one single person passing out from COVID, just killing over, boom, falling in their face like they did in China. So a bunch of nonsense and simple tricks.
We see in our own country a great diversity of the way people approach things, a great difference in the seriousness in which they take it. Whereas if we had a uniformity of it and everybody rowed together in the same boat, we probably would do much better. But, the typical thing, masks for a while became almost a political issue. There were people who were making statements about whether or not they were wearing a mask. That's not good when you're in a pandemic and you want everybody to do the best public health things.
I couldn't agree more with Fauci that we do have a big diversity in this country. And if we all rode together with common sense, we'll be in a much better place. Because if everybody didn't follow the whole edicts of the masks and the nonsense, which is all, it's very clear, and a lot of doctors have talked about it, the masks, the way we are misusing it on the street, reusing it 8 hours straight in a day, is actually making people sick. You're rebreathing your own germs, you're not getting fresh air, you're lowering your oxygen, and all those germs that you're collecting around your mouth, you're just touching it, putting the mask back in your pocket, and then putting it back. It's a germ fest. So yeah, if everybody rode together, we'll be in a much better place if we did it with common sense. But I'm guessing he's not thinking about that. He's thinking about China. He's thinking about if everybody just did the thing, the edicts from the government, and everybody just followed the rules and wore the mask. That's what he's thinking when he's thinking about that we should all be the same. And if everybody, thought the same way, I'm sure he's thinking about, China. All right, guys. Sorry if this video went too long, and the format is a little different. So kind of long clips with my commentaries afterwards. I just really wanted to get the actual question and answer to be as it was in the video. Didn't want to just jump in and, muddy the waters, per se. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.